From Washington, the McLaughlin Group, the American original. For over 3 decades, the sharpest minds, best sources, hardest talk.
Issue 1, Taliban terror. Chaos returned to Afghanistan's capital, Kabul, this week. Taliban attackers killed at least 64 people and injured hundreds more, detonating a car bomb and then spraying gunfire into the crowd. The Taliban sought to maximize casualties, and the suffering is likely to continue. The Taliban claim the attack is their opening strike of the so-called spring fighting season. In previous years, the Taliban have escalated their attacks during Afghanistan's warm months. But note this, Commander-in-Chief Obama has increased the U.S. military presence in Afghanistan. These new ground deployments, President Obama says, are necessary to help train and aid Afghan security forces. Question, will Afghanistan ever find stability? Pat Buchanan.
I don't think the Afghan government can survive on its own, John. They've had tremendous numbers of American troops in there and couldn't defeat the Taliban. And now we've got about 9,500, I think, there. Obama's supposed to bring them down to 5,000 by the end of the year. I don't think that's going to happen. I mean, the Taliban are in Helmand, they're active in Kunduz, they're blowing things up in Kabul. I think what we got here is a situation where the United States is going to have to remain there indefinitely, or if we don't, I think the Taliban may not have the power to take over the whole country, but they've got the ability to knock down that government, I think, and create chaos and take over parts of it for themselves. We've been there 15 years. The effort to build an independent and free Afghanistan, I think, is a failure.
Well, there is a same Groundhog Day quality to this reporting. Every year there's a spring fighting season. I think the hope was that the new coalition government, which had undertaken talks with the Taliban, that there was going to be some sort of rapprochement, but I think the Taliban saw it just as another opening to begin fighting again. American troops at least are not on the front lines. It's not like we're getting casualty reports every week or day or month. But I agree. It's a pretty it's a pretty sad situation, and I think the best this president can do is to kind of keep a lid on it. And if the next president wants to either withdraw more or intensify, that's a decision for the future.
Was Afghanistan ever stable in the 20th century? Tom Rogan.
The history of Afghanistan going back, I mean, it was always part of the Great Game. There's always been a place of warfare. It's always been a deeply tribal culture, especially in the south and the east, because the Pashtuns.
You're mumbling again.
I'm mumbling?
Mumbling.
I'll speak more eloquently. So Pakistan, Afghanistan, in the south.
I think you mumble as a decoy effort.
A decoy?
A decoy, yeah. When you're not quite sure of the answer, we suddenly get the mumble.
Okay, well,
so you out, Rogan.
Some of the letters coming in.
All right, well, let's do it then.
19th
century
mumble.
Unstable because of the British influence in terms of imperial trade routes. 20th century, earlier part, more stable. Soviet invasion, 1979, whacking the government. I know this stuff a little bit, but the south and east of the country with the Pashtun tribal culture means that it's very hard to impose centralized government. I think what we will find, the problem with the president, as much as he made the right decision in keeping an extension of troops, it's not quite enough troops there. The military wants more to do the train assist, aviation intelligence. But what you'll essentially think happen is secure the arterial lines of communication, the roads from Kandahar to Kabul, and secure Kabul as best you can, but areas like Helmand province, unfortunately, it's going to be tribal politics. Because,
for 4 decades it lasted, 33 to 73, the country was ruled by King Mohammed Zahir Shah. So it did have some rulership.
It was stable under the Taliban. It wasn't very pleasant, but it was stable under them.
That's right.
Well, but it's not stable for us in terms of Al-Qaeda.
Afghanistan was modernizing before the Soviet invasion, I believe. Is that correct?
Well, I think that's right. But the Soviets went in there and knocked that government over and put their own government in, which lasted about 2 or 3 more years. But then the Taliban took over. They're under control. But you're right. Al-Qaeda was operating under the Taliban.
Right.
And frankly, I think we should have gone in
And
and
now
told the
It's
government
government
essentially a
we're
narco state.
Yes,
I mean,
well,
their main
they
crop
weren't under the
is.
Taliban. The Taliban
Well, the
initially.
Taliban now has gone
Now
into
they're into it.
into that business as well.
I didn't think even call them a
yeah.
state because they've never really had a strong central government. Essentially, it is still a collection of tribes running various parts of various regions. That's who we've had to work through in order to have something resembling stability.
Uzbeks, Tajiks, Hazaras, Pashtun. So if when it breaks
this goes
down,
on.
that's probably what's going to happen to it.
Exit question: Are Iraq and Afghanistan better off or worse off than when President Obama took office?
Far worse
I ask
off.
you. We'll go around the horn.
Well, they're far worse off. Both of them are just in horrendous shape, and they've got scores of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, dead, and millions of homeless.
I don't think either of them are worse off than when he took office. And to suggest that Obama is to blame, let's go back to the original sin and the invasion of Iraq, which happened under the previous president. That was the biggest strategic bumbling mistake
I agree
ever.
with
So
that.
was the 2011 withdrawal, and the president is not, in my mind, telling the truth when he blames that purely on that. Could have been done. But look, Iraq is worse, Afghanistan is better.
Now, do you mean the withdrawal from Afghanistan could have been
Iraq.
done? Iraq, yeah. Well, I think, they're in bad shape. At least they don't have as many American troops there as they used to, and that has become our new strategy now, to try to keep things as stable as we can without having our people on the front lines. But the casualties the Afghan army's been taking have been horrendous, and it's not going to end before Obama leaves office. I suspect he is going to try very hard to bring it down to 5,000 because he didn't want the current surge in the first place. But
if you're going to
what's going to happen after that is a
that
question.
gives you capability. That's the problem, right? If you just put these broad, it's like I think it's Vice President Biden. He likes to have those cap numbers, but
capability to do what? I just saw a report, an
Train,
award-winning
advise, assist.
newspaper report about the schools that were built that are not, they're empty. And others are supposed to be built that weren't, and the money has disappeared.
that has to be,
it's
I
just
think,
so crazy.
deprioritized now.
Is that
Real
in
politics.
Chicago?
Huh?
Is that in Chicago?
That's Afghanistan, John. We were supposed to build schools, remember, part of the
answer
long
sounded like
peacekeeping effort?
Chicago.
I'm sorry?
The answer sounded like Chicago.
Well, you like Chicago, John. I know you want to bring us back there, but it's okay with me.
The answer is Iraq and Afghanistan are worse off now. Issue 2, crumbling ceasefire.
And that discussion about transition is the key test of the seriousness of the Assad regime, of Russia and Iran to support what we have put into words.
It's only 2 months old, but as officials met for peace talks in Geneva, Syria's ceasefire was crumbling. President Obama had hoped the February ceasefire would encourage Russia to push its ally, Bashar al-Assad, to relinquish power. But instead, it seems, Russia is preparing to crush rebel forces in the northern city of Aleppo and further degrade the power of U.S.-supported rebels fighting Mr. Assad's regime. In response, President Obama is considering escalating his support for those rebel groups. According to the Wall Street Journal, the U.S. may provide these rebels with anti-air missile systems to shoot down Syrian and possibly also Russian jets. In a sign, President Putin feels confident Russian military jets simulated an attack on a U.S. warship in the Baltic Sea. What do you think is happening here, Clarence?
I think the Russians are waving their sabers at us. At the same time, they're trying to expand their control in Syria without getting too deeply involved in the combat over there. But this is Syria. They pulled it into their sphere of influence, and the ceasefire that was broken is probably not going to get reestablished very quickly, but it needs to be genuine before we can leave it.
What the Russians are doing makes more sense than anybody else. They want to keep their ally Assad in power. They want to keep their base at Tartus, their base in Latakia. Both of those. They want to preserve the regime, and that's so they're fighting the rebels, both bad and good rebels, so to speak. It's the Americans who don't make sense. We're supporting the rebels, and then we'd like Assad overthrown. But the Al-Qaeda and the ISIS people, we'd like to fight them. our allies, the Saudis and the Turks, want to overthrow Assad. So the whole thing is really a mess. But again, just as we talked before, more than 250,000 dead and millions homeless. And something like 9 million people displaced. It is a horror show.
Yeah, but the American position is that Assad, if he continues in power, the fighting doesn't stop. So if you want to bring the fighting to an end, you've got to figure out a way to transition Assad out. And I think the president was over in that region and talking to the European allies and basically said there are no good options. And in that interview he did in Atlantic Magazine, he said he'd be much more willing to take more risks in Syria if he hadn't come in with 2 wars on his hands, and he's looking at another situation with a lot of the same dynamics, to send more Americans in there, more weapons in there, to have probably the same bad outcome. He's just not interested.
Yeah, well, I think, look, the problem that we have is that Putin is just playing us for fools repeatedly, and the tangible quality to that is what's happening, in the sense that we tell these rebel groups, we say to the Sunni Arabs and Turks, who are bad allies, you're right, but we say to them, don't fund the Al-Qaeda-aligned groups because we're going to support these rebel groups and because this ceasefire is going to work. And then Putin breaks the ceasefire and keeps doing it again. So then the Sunni monarchies in Turkey throw money at those Al-Qaeda groups. So it metastasizes. And I think the problem, and absolutely, we have Syria is the great example that we have, apart from the Jordanians, really, we have very poor allies.
More American firepower is the answer to that?
I think more special forces, and the president is moving in that direction.
But one of the dumbest things I think we could do is start handing out surface-to-air missiles to rebels to shoot down Russian planes. I mean, is there anything there that's worth the confrontation between the United States and Russia, or even between our NATO ally Turkey and Russia? That's the kind of thing you want to avoid.
I suspect the president is holding the line on that. He's been thought to be thinking about this for the last 6 years, maybe.
Yeah, we don't
Never
want
gets
their missiles to fall into the hands of Al-Qaeda or ISIS either.
Sure.
And you bring them in there, and that possibility is wide open.
Let me remind you that Putin is growing desperate. Russia's economy is nearing a tipping point. If sanctions remain in place, Russia runs out of foreign reserves next year. The Russian ruble will collapse.
His economy is in tough shape, there's no doubt, and it's not getting better, and the oil prices aren't helping him because they're heavily reliant on that. But I wouldn't say that he's
more dangerous, right?
I don't know why. Look, he's a tough autocratic ruler of Russia. They've always had that. Every czar has been that, and we can't get along with these people. What is the matter with this country?
I don't know that it's a question of getting along with him. It's a question of him being assertive outside his country in order to distract from his economic problems. That doesn't mean inability to get along with him. He's acting in what he thinks are his best interests.
What are we doing? Giving war guarantees to the 3 little Baltic countries.
Democracy, they're NATO member states. It's the principle of the...
What is the principle? We're going to go to war to fight for Estonia? Are you kidding?
No,
nuclear war?
What are we doing standing up for Putin all the time?
I'm not standing up for him. You got to deal with the guy. Is one of the people in the world.
They are dealing with him. They're pushing back.
It's like Xi Jinping. You got to deal with him.
Yeah. Well, look, and this is the great balance about how do you do it, what do you do. I think the problem is, though, that ISIS is a direct symptom of the, Assad killing loads of Sunni young men, essentially. And unless you resolve that with Assad going, that ISIS will continue. And it renders in Brussels and San Bernardino. And
Putin is an ally of ours against ISIS. He doesn't have any problem with us bombing ISIS. I mean, Donald Trump said he'd like to see the Russians bombing ISIS.
Yeah, he gives lip service to that, but his actions don't follow up his words.
Keep Assad in power because it's a lie. Does that make sense?
Is Syria
if you keep Assad in power, you don't get rid of ISIS.
Here's the question: is Syria headed for partition? Yes or no?
Ultimately, I think it's either going to be partition, or I think the Alawites, the Shia, who are the minority, and the Christians, John, are going to come in for real hell if the Sunnis win that war.
No.
I don't know what it would be partitioned into and for, so I'm going to say no.
It kind of already is west, east, north, but not formally, no.
I'm changing my question for you. Did you get that message?
Well, you got the Kurds up north.
Did you get my message on that?
No.
Oh, is Putin fearful of being overthrown in a coup?
No.
No, it's not likely to happen.
He's very popular, believe it or not, because he
Only 80.
because
it's only,
he
it's
doesn't
only
allow
85%.
outside media in.
It's only 85%.
Yeah.
Well, he knows how to handle his publicity and information, propaganda, with his own people there. That's his primary concern.
He fears a coup and is enlarging his palace guard.
But it doesn't mean that a coup is inevitable, though, or that he's even under a
Well,
threat
what
of
in
one.
life is
He's just
inevitable?
paranoid.
What in life is inevitable?
No, he's paranoid, though, all the time, whether or not there's an actual coup threat or not. So I would not depend on there being a coup threat right now.
You're accusing him of paranoia?
Yes. I'm diagnosing him with paranoia.
You better watch your
But
step.
it's typical. Every autocrat is paranoid because they can be overthrown like anybody else.
You're not becoming a problem for him, are you? Putin.
Who becoming a problem?
You?
Me a problem for Putin? I hope so.
Issue 3, state of the two-state solution.
And I firmly believe that the actions that Israel's government has taken over the past several years, the steady and systematic expansion of settlements, the legalization of outposts, land seizures, they're moving us, and more importantly, they're moving Israel in the wrong direction. They're moving us toward a one-state reality, and that reality is dangerous.
Speaking to the liberal pro-Israel J Street group this week, Vice President Biden criticized Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The Prime Minister, Mr. Biden said, is damaging peace efforts with the Palestinian people. And while the Vice President condemned Palestinian terrorism, his sharp words on Israeli settlement construction in the West Bank raised some eyebrows in Washington and Tel Aviv. That's because, as the McLaughlin Group noted on January 22nd, Israel relies heavily on U.S. diplomatic support. Still, note this, in his own speech to J Street, Secretary of State John Kerry promised the U.S. would not give up on a two-state solution. Are Joe Biden and John Kerry right or wrong? Let's try that on you, Clarence.
Well, I think the two-state solution is it's not comatose, but it's in suspended animation right now because we haven't seen Netanyahu show much displeasure with the status quo for all of his talk about moving and making progress. President Obama has laid off on criticizing him, but now we see Joe Biden being very public and upfront about it in the last year of the Obama administration. And we can hope that there might be more of a dialogue on this, at least to set things up for the next administration.
So he's damaged. He's demanded prospects for the two-state solution.
Well, yeah, the prospects are damaged anyway, though, as far as I can see.
Yeah, I mean, there's some speculation that the administration might put forward some plan by the end of the year that be sort of a token effort. But I think what you're seeing is a generational split in the Jewish community, and younger people are more willing to criticize Netanyahu, and you saw Bernie Sanders, the Democratic candidate, kind of playing into that in the New York primary of all places. And politically, a couple of years ago, that would have been unthinkable. So there is kind of a willingness to kind of put some pressure on Netanyahu from American Jews.
But I think it's irrelevant because, look, Bibi Netanyahu didn't want to get out of Gaza. He's been building settlements almost every year, new settlements in the West Bank. There's 650,000 Israelis in East Jerusalem and on the West Bank. He has said this past week that we're never going to give up the Golan Heights. They belong to us now. And I think Kerry tried this for 18 months, made a heroic effort, got nowhere. I think it's a waste of our time, really, to try to push Bibi Netanyahu in this direction. But there's no doubt what Eleanor says is true. If you talk about Americans, and especially younger Americans and kids in college and things, that Israel is no longer the beau ideal of nations it once was.
Well, look, and
Both Kerry and Biden are right.
Yeah, they're both going to be gone
Israel
in 6 months.
Huh?
They're both going to be gone in 6 months.
Israel is paying lip service to the two-state solution.
Yeah.
Israel has concluded that the Middle East is too roiled to risk Palestinian statehood.
Yeah, can I?
There it
True.
is with the bark off.
Yeah,
True.
can I? So I think the issue here, yes, the settlement construction is profoundly negative. I mean, every administration since Truman and the creation of Israel has said that, Republican and Democrat. But the problem as well is that the Israelis, in terms of their diplomacy, and this is why I think you see some concern in the foreign ministry, know that people who really do hate the Israelis around the world, and there are quite a lot of them actually in Europe, use that because they see Hamas through the visage of the Hamas kafir, right, the revolutionary, that there's some kind of Che Guevara type appeal to it, when the reality is they are blood-drenched murderers. So the Israelis actually hurt themselves by not drawing attention to the positive moral contrast that I think most of the case.
And it's hard to disagree with. Well, Bibi is saying, look, we got these enemies all around us: Hamas, Hezbollah. Good heavens, we don't know who's going to wind up in Damascus. We're not giving up a thing. We're going to keep what we got. And I think us talking about it is
but
is
in
talk.
their own self-interest, if they want to be a Jewish democratic state, they've got to come to terms with the population in that area.
How are they going to divide that up now? I think those who say they've reached the point of a one-state solution are about right.
We'll give you better than that. Multiple choice exit question. Is the two-state solution A, in suspended animation, B, comatose, C, moribund, or D, dead?
I think de facto it's dead.
I go with A, suspended animation. Things change. Netanyahu is not forever.
A, Clarence, suspended animation.
You've come back to where I began. Yes, indeed, suspended animation.
2 for suspended animation.
3.
3.
1 for DOA. How about you?
I'm reflecting. I think it's too close to call.
Too close to call.
Issue 4, a question of lawful presence.
It's not normal life. It's really hard to understand. Maybe sometimes the immigration take me and separate me from my daughter.
Protesters gathered at the U.S. Supreme Court this week in support of President Obama's executive action on immigration amnesty. 26 states are challenging the amnesty that would affect 4 million illegal immigrants. 2 issues are before the court. First, whether the 26 states have sufficient grievance or, quote, standing to sue, unquote, the federal government for harms the states claim Mr. Obama's amnesty will impose. Specifically, the states claim they will have to spend millions of dollars providing driving licenses to illegal immigrants. Second, whether the amnesty is unlawful. The states claim amnesty usurps congressional authority on immigration law. But note this, the Supreme Court has a vacant seat. So if the justices vote 4-4, Mr. Obama's amnesty will be denied. Question, what happens if the court splits? Pat Buchanan.
Then the federal appellate court decision stands and the Obama amnesty is canceled. There are 2 questions, John. The question of standing, do the states have standing? And I think that's an easy question, easy call. They do, because there's going to take considerable amount of resources. And then does the President of the United States have the authority to do what he did? And I think at least 4 justices of the Supreme Court are going to say no, he did not have the authority, that this is a question in which clearly the Congress of the United States has got to be engaged, cannot be an executive decision. And President Obama, before he took his executive decision doing this, he was saying, I don't have the authority, I don't have the authority. Yeah. So they're probably going to be reading the president's statements
to the
president's attorneys.
This is very narrow, and previous presidents, Eisenhower, George H.W. Bush, George W. Bush, Ronald Reagan, have all taken similar actions to apply to classes of people that have been caught up in our immigration system. The standing that Texas is claiming, that it would cost money to give driver's license, that is the phoniest excuse I've ever heard. One, they can just charge more for the driver's licenses, or they could deny them, as they currently do, to these people. This is not amnesty. This is a 3-year moratorium so that the parents of children who are U.S. citizens can work lawfully instead of having to hide in the shadows and work off the books and be taken advantage of by businesses.
The question is whether the president has the authority, not whether it's a good idea.
He has the authority based on several previous presidents.
That's
yes.
Right.
And look, I have to say, unsurprisingly perhaps, I'm with Pat on this. I think to take that action in a country of laws, and look, the president, as the law professor, his precedence there was that this would be unlawful. But as a politician, he's changed.
I would agree with you.
Executive power, very quickly, executive power, the expansion of that in terms of this act, it's against the grain of law, and it's against the tradition of American law.
Well, I would agree with you if he was trying to make a decision that would last longer than his administration. But by confining it to his administration, this is part of the managerial executive functions of the executive branch.
Clarence, is it confined to his administration?
A new president can come in and change the policy. That basically is what.
In other words,
boils
presidents
down to.
can decide these things either whichever way they want.
It's a very narrow decision.
Right, it's
Something
an
this narrow,
enforcement. Yeah, he's choosing not to focus enforcement powers on deporting parents with children who are U.S. citizens. How can you be in favor of that?
Suspending enforcement of the law. It's not whether I agree or disagree. It's whether he has the power to suspend enforcement of the law.
I wish immigration law was that simple, but it's not. That's where people are confused.
That's right.
Because there are a lot of people who are in the country who are not documented, but they're not breaking the law. There is some kind of a gray area status.
Why don't we get rid of Congress then? If we're saying
come
executive
on
action.
now.
No, but
I just explained it to you. Let's try it
the
again. Look,
precedence
if
of
he was
this-
trying to go beyond his office or the term of office, I would agree with you, but he's not.
But Congress has taken ownership of that in the co-equal branches of government that we have.
Lawyers scrubbed this to make sure that this was something that he could do within his realm of authority. And if they do come down with a decision, it'll be split 4 and 4. There will be a
why
fifth
did the lower courts
justice.
say you haven't got the power?
This is a political decision wrapped up in
the
legal
appellate court has said he
trappings.
doesn't have the power.
The law is just gray enough
One
that it's a
lower
dispute
court
right now.
said he doesn't have the power.
Predictions, Pat.
Trump will win all 5 primaries on Tuesday.
Hillary Clinton will win all 5 primaries on Tuesday.
They will both win all 5.
They will each win 4 out of the 5.
I'll change the venue. Brazil's Senate will vote to impeach President Dilma Rousseff. Bye-bye.